everyone, I'm Sid, and I work on a bunch of side projects. It's hard to sum it up, so I'm just going to jump straight into the talk. So I'm a developer at Code Sandbox, and I spent the last year working on a bunch of interactions. So I'm a front of the front end developer, which means I don't really spend a lot of time on the editor or the compiler behind Code Sandbox. I spend most of the time on the UI and how people touch things and all that. So I spent a lot of time working on interactivity last year. So when you interact with the interface, what should move, how do we use animations, and a bunch of things. So and I want to ask this question in general to begin with, which is what makes an interface good to interact with, right? So there's basic things like, I'm saying basic, it's not basic. There's some things which are common knowledge, which are like the design should be clean, right? And it should be fast. But then there are also a bunch of things which are not so common on the web, but are really powerful, like motion. So animations are usually chucked into this category where if you're building a website which is like for a game or for a movie, then you'll use massive animations and there'll be a lot of interactions and stuff. But if it's a professional website, we tend to ignore animations. And uh, I'm here to pitch that when used tastefully, subtle animations can actually give a lot of context to your user and drive the interface essentially. So I'll stop talking now and I'll start showing you what I mean. So for this talk, I built like a very tiny um, social, what do you call it? Like a social media website. It's called Saturday, and the logic is that it's only open on Saturdays. I know, amazing. So, so when you go to Saturday, it looks like your boring traditional social media, and you can click a post and you can read it. There are comments. So, for example, Pavitra's post, I'm not calling it a tweet. Pavitra's post has a few comments here, and you'll notice that when I click something, it just snaps open, right? So there's no context given of what's happening. So, for example, if I click Neha's post, it just snaps open over here. And same goes for reply. So it's loading some reply and then just pop open there, which is kind of like a janky experience. It's especially visible when you load new posts. So if like on the top, you have more posts. When you click it, uh, those posts just show up. And a lot of times you lose context of where you were earlier. But now you have these posts all of a sudden like thrown into your face like this. So and that's not like it's not uncommon, right? This is something that happens on a lot of websites. A lot of our favorite websites is like you forget where you were, you lose context because content just snaps at you. So, and this is something that mobile applications have kind of had like a lot of years ahead of web applications, where they use motion to really set the context of where you are and where you're going. And I think that there's no excuse for web applications not to have the same level, because to be honest, like the tech is there now. The technology and the browsers and internet support, like we're at a stage where we can't really use that as an excuse. Now it's just we just need to do a lot of implementation work. So okay, so let me start by showing you something. So for example, I'll reload this page if I can. Perfect. So this tweet, I'm gonna keep saying tweet. This post that I clicked, it snaps open, right? So the bare minimum that we can do, and this is something that a lot of websites do, is fade it in. So every example that I'm giving in this talk, I've built it with Framer Motion just because that's what I've been using. But you can do everything with CSS animations as well. So this is not necessarily a JavaScript or a React thing. But if you are using React, then Framer Motion is really cool to do it. But you can do it with CSS. So what I'm going to do is a bit of live coding around how Framer Motion works is you can take any element and you can say motion.div, right? So like style component has a style.div, they have motion.div. And because I'm using a different component library, I'm going to use the as prop of that and just say I'm going to use motion.div. Now, by itself, this doesn't really do anything, but it gives you access to these two props. So there's an initial prop and there's an animate prop. With the initial, you can say, what is the entry state? So in my case, I'm going to say it's invisible. It has 0 opacity. And then I want to animate it to opacity of 1, right? So just by doing this, what I get is when I click this, you can see it's fading in, right? And then when you click out, you go back to the thing. So it gives you a little interaction of something has changed, right? Especially if you click the first one where it's in the same location, you still get a feeling that something has changed. Let's do the same with these replies. I'm going to open, there's a bunch of code, so I'll try to like really narrow down the focus of where you should be looking. And all right, so this one I've already put motion, and it has all the elements. So this is a list. So this is motion.ul, has an initial opacity of 0, animation opacity, it goes to 1. And then for the transition, I basically have 0 seconds. I'm going to change this to 0.2 seconds, like 200 milliseconds. And now you should be able to see the difference. So when I load this, you see this fades in. So already we're saying like there's some more context, that more content has just arrived. Otherwise, if it just snaps into place, you often miss what was there. But when it fades in, now you know this is new content that was loaded. Same goes for like if I write something here, like I don't know what to write, wow, right? That also just pops in, which is fine in this case, but it's even nicer if it fades in. So I'm going to change branches because I also feel like this is kind of silly that there's nothing here. So it would be nice if we add a spinner. And the spinner gives some context, but again, unless it fades in, you kind of miss the thing. Okay, so changing branches because I have a bunch of code written already. Force checkout, discard files, great. Okay, so the next thing I want to like show you and focus on is that even when we're fading in, we can use animation for a subtle change, which is I'm going to say y, which translates to like what is the y position. So if I say y 40, it converts to a CSS of translate y minus 40, so it goes up. And I'm going to say the y should go from minus 40 to 0. And what this will do is it will kind of give you the feel of like it's popping out of the post, right? So when you click here, first the post fades in and then your content pops out. So that establishes that these replies are part of the post, right? So the post came in and then the attached data came from the post. And this is something which is very common in games, in mobile applications. Just that in web, we don't really do it. Okay, let's see. I like that's better. I'm also going to attach the same thing to this last form. Okay, that's good. So, and now when I do a reply, I'm going to say, Pavitra, you're so smart. This is not sarcasm. She's actually very smart. You'll see that it pops in, but there's some sort of delay, right? So if I type another one, there's a delay happening here. And what I've tried to simulate here is a lot of times what we do is you type something, you send an API request, it succeeds, and then we show it, right? So there's this gap over there, which feels odd in interfaces when you're interacting. And what I want to push for is like optimistic updates. So when you add a comment over here, it should optimistically add it as if the API request would succeed. And then if it fails, then we handle the error, right? So it's a bit tricky because it's always easier to wait for validation. But in a lot of cases, the user doesn't really care what your server validation is, of course. So it's always like nicer for the user if you can to show it first and then do the harder error handling of like if it didn't succeed, then you have to bring it back into the editor and show a red thing. So what I'm going to do to simulate it is just remove the delay I have because I don't have a real backend to show you these examples. So I'm just going to remove the delay. And now you'll see that when I write something, new comment, it pops in right away, right? And then it's sending requests to the hypothetical API and making sure it's persistent, which is, again, something that mobile applications and games have always done, right? They have a sync, they have a persist, which is after the user comes first, and then all of the technical mumbo jumbo that we do comes. Okay, so let's take this to another step. Am I moving too fast? I don't know. I've finished my talk in 15 minutes. So I'm going to go through my notes. I'm sorry. I've talked about optimistic updates. Okay, so this one's really cool. Let's go back here. When we're loading new posts, you'll notice that even though they fade in, you still lose context of where you were earlier. And there's a very nice way of making sure that the context is still there. which is to use layout animation. So with frame and motion, it's very easy to do layout animations, which is this is my, let's see, these are my mapping through the posts, and this is the list element. And inside that, I have the post. So the list element is already a motion.li instead of, say, just an li. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this fade and instead add a layout prop. Now, what this layout prop does is it looks at all the siblings that have a layout and then tries to animate smartly. So if you insert something in between, it will try to make some space. Let me show you how that actually looks. I'm going to save. So now when I click on this header, you'll see that this new div was inserted, which automatically pushed the rest of the content. Let me show you again, because it's easy to miss. When I click, all of the content gets pushed on because there's a new element. And now, of course, when I load more posts, something similar should happen. I see like a bunch of posts came. So Nitish's post, which was the first one, went down really fast. And I really like this kind of layout animation because it gives you a context of this is where we were with Nitish and Pavitra on like their posts over here. And when I click load more, it got pushed down. So you know that if you scroll down, their posts are still there. And it's really nice, especially if you can see it at the bottom because you see it moving. But even if it goes out, it will just go out faster. But you still have a context of this is where I was. When I click new post, new things came, and now the previous position is down there. So I'm comparing it to Twitter, where sometimes you miss where you were. And I'm sure they have the reasons for it. All right, so okay, I'm gonna check out to the pre-final branch. Cool. So for this one, I want to show something, and this is I've actually deployed this one. So if you want to follow along, you can. If you open saturday.versal.app, especially on your mobile phones, because it looks really good on mobile, more than web. So if you go to saturday.versal.app, you can play around with this app as well while I'm talking about it, just to get a sense of the interactions. These are always nicer to touch and feel than just see on a video. So all right, so now let me show you another example here of what I'm trying to talk about. So I'm going to open this Twitter back button. So this is the, wait, let me also show you. Whoops, I need my URL bar. Okay. So when you go to Twitter, there's something interesting that happens. When I click on a tweet, it opens in a different, and then there's a back button, right? When I click back, it 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 on the storyline goes back, but the arrow doesn't really have anything. Right? It's not like it's going to the left. So the arrow is pointing somewhere, but the arrow, like for all we know, could have been pointed up, down. It could have been across. It doesn't really matter, right? And this is something that we see a lot, where a lot of the icons uh, have become like they're not actually symbols anymore. They're just icons that we identify, like a hamburger or a back button. We just know we're going back in history, but the arrow itself could have been anything, right? And let me show you what you would see on a mobile application. So this is the same application, same company, but on mobile. So when I click on one of these tweets, when I click on the first one, it flows from the right. Let me play it down. So when you click it, the new tweet came from the right. So there's a sense of like you're going into a different screen. And now when you click left, which is back and pointing towards left, you're actually going to the left screen, right? So there's a notion of like there's two screens, one is on the right, one is on the left, and you get some directional feeling when you click left, right? So you're going right into the details, and then you go left to zoom out. Let me show you another one. This one is really nice. So this one's Instagram, and when I click on the camera button on top, the camera thing slides from the left. So it's very interesting. They could have just popped the camera, but they've chosen to do it. It slides the UI from the left. And what's really cool is that it's also a hint that you can actually drag it back. So to open something Oops. All right.
Hey, Sid. Hi. Are you facing any difficulties?
Yeah, I think my mic got disconnected on its own. What's the last thing you heard?
Okay. I think we had till now just 2 seconds or
Okay,
5 seconds back. I think we stopped
perfect. Okay, so then we're
when
good.
something came up, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, perfect then. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm gonna go back here then. So let me. Yeah, I'm just gonna quickly repeat this one because I'm not sure where I got stuck. So what Instagram does is camera comes from the left, and what's really good about that is they've established that if you drag from the left, it's always there, and then if you close, you can drag it back to the right. And this is how you can use motions and animations to establish user patterns. It's not all good. I found this really cool platform versus animation fight, which would must have happened inside Instagram. So look at this name on the top, and there's like this tiny menu, right? Or at least understand like down arrow means menu now because we see it a lot. And when you click this, I expected something to come here or a drop down or something to come from the top maybe. But what happens is when you click it, it comes from the bottom, which makes no sense when you think about like where is the arrow pointing? Like why is it coming from? But the iOS, what do you say? iOS UI guidelines say that the menu should come from the bottom, and that they also copy the same to Android. But the icon is just like it feels like something is off, right? So for Saturday, what I was trying to do is I tried to do a different pattern, which is when you click on a post, because it's full screen, it kind of zooms in, right? So you're going into the details of a post and you zoom into it. And then when you click it, you zoom out of it. So when I click it, it zooms in. And this is like a whole page. So I'm trying to scroll, but I can't because it's everything. And when I close, it goes back into the same position. So let me show you how this works. I really like this part. And there are like multiple ways to do it. But the way I like to do it is slightly imperative. So I have this post element, right? So what I'm doing is when you click this, there are two elements of the same thing. So there's the post, and then there's another post absolutely positioned on top of it. And I calculate the initial Y position by just taking like what is the post element and like get the box and see where the box started. That is my initial position. So with frame and motion, I say initial position is Y is the initial Y, which is calculated imperatively, and animated to Y0. And then I also have an exit animation, which is go back to the initial position. And this is really cool because this could be anywhere. Like I could put this at the edge of the screen and then open it, and it comes from the top. When I close it, it tucks it back, and then there I see the house post again, which by the way is like really cool. You should follow her. She's putting like really interesting art stuff. And so again, pops it down, closes back to the same position. And so now we're establishing like, when you look at this, um, this is not a new pattern that something blows up and something goes back. But what's really interesting is that when it zooms in, this is not a new pattern or this is not an isolated pattern even on the web. We have dialogues and modals which are the same pattern, which also gives us a good template for what should be the accessibility story here. So for example, sorry, while I'm here, I should be able to just press escape and exit, right? So I open this, let me put my keyboard thingy, right? And when I press escape, it should close. Similarly, I am here. When I start tabbing, I should be able to tab between the close button and the comment button. And I should be in a focus trap, right? So when you open a dialog and you keep tabbing, it should loop between these two or loop between the controls of a dialog instead of going out of the dialog and going somewhere like go to the footer and stuff. So we already have these semantics already established, just that we can use them more creatively over here. So this essentially is a dialog which opens from source, closes, goes back into the source. Now, there's another thing, and this is where I got carried away, but I think it's a good idea, especially on mobile, which is if when you open this, it goes up, shouldn't you also be able to push it down to set it back into its place? And luckily for us, Frame Motion, and there's a bunch of good drag libraries in React. Frame Motion has a drag prop, Sorry, I'm going to disable keyboard now. We don't need it. And what this lets us do is lets us like drag it. And by default, it's like it's Spring animation, so you can drag and send it wherever. I'm going to put these constraints that when you try to drag it, it should stay at a certain spot. So let's open this. Now, you see when I drag it and I leave it, it springs back into position. And we're getting all of this for free because of Frame of Motion uses spring animations. So when I drag it back, it snaps in a very spring way, right? So you pull a spring and you leave it, goes really fast and then slows down, um, like how a spring should work. So I can drag it, it goes back. And now what I've done is when you stop dragging, you can see how much was it dragged. So I'm using the offset, and what I'm trying to say here is if it was dragged more than 100 pixels in this direction or 100 pixels in that direction, snap it back. I'm saying deselect the post, put it back into its place. So let me show you. When I start dragging and I drag too much, it goes there. Let's put this even, actually, let's try to open this one. And I'll see when I drag enough, it goes back into this position. And the most interesting part is because I'm using this initial Y, it always knows which position to snap back to. So no matter where I drag it, it nicely falls back into the same position and then disappears. And then the original one is already behind it, right? Remember, this is an absolute position clone of the original. So when I drag it, it goes back. And finally, what you also, if you're building something like this, what would be really interesting is to give the user some hints of what's behind it. So I've stored the drag offset in a use state. I'm controlling the drag state. I'm storing it in state. This is what I'm trying to say. There's a use state here somewhere. There we go. There's a React use state where I'm just tracking the drag offset. And then I'm using this drag offset to change the opacity of the background thing. So when I start dragging, you can see like the background becomes visible. So if this is up here and I start dragging, Nitish's post slowly starts and you can see Neha's post. So it's kind of giving you a feeling that when you start dragging, if you leave it, it's going to snap back, right? So again, using motion, using animations and motion and gestures in this case to give a hint of what would happen instead of just snapping into place, because that's how most games and most mobile applications work, and we can really bring this into the web because, well, the tech is here. All right, then there are just 2 points which I want to kind of bring up before we end this talk. The first one is when you're building this kind of interface, what's really, really important is to not forget about accessibility. So we're doing a lot of animation here. We're thinking of custom patterns like this zoom in and zoom out, we're inventing these concepts, right? Where there are all these posts, you can zoom into a post. But what's really important here is even with all of these animations and context shifts, it's important to remember that accessibility is going to be important for most users. So one of these examples is using patterns that already exist. So in this case, we're using the dialog, which means hitting escape should close it. Uh, there should be a focus lock where you can tab between these states and it shouldn't go out of it. Um, Next one is with animation specifically. When you're doing a lot of motion animations, it's important to remember that there are folks with motion sickness, there are folks with vestibular motion diseases, in which case, like the more motion you have, it makes the UI feel dizzy, right? So let me show you actually. So if I go to accessibility, so this is how Mac, like when you change screens, it slides in. You've seen this before. But if you enable reduce motion, which is an accessibility setting, now when I change the screen, I'm still doing the 3-finger swipe. It doesn't move, it only fades in. And this is a setting called reduce motion. So whenever you're doing animations, it's important to remember that there are users whose life you're making harder if you have a lot of motion, and you need to also take them into account. And again, with any animation library, you kind of have some ways to already take care of it. So with frame of motion, you get this hook called use reduce motion, which basically reads browsers expose that the OS has reduced motion enabled, and you get this as a prop essentially, or as a hook. And we can use this in our animation. So the place where we're saying the initial Y should be a different position and animate into it, I'm going to add a condition here with like if the if the user has said, don't give me a lot of motion, then I'm going to say, keep the same position as the final state. Same goes for exit. If they don't want motion, then it should not use the initial state. It should just go to the find, like it shouldn't change states a lot. So when we do this, you see that there is, in the selected post, there is no motion. I should do the same with replies. But if we still want some motion, because fading is still better, it's a lot of people who get motion sickness are they don't get it from elements fading in. But of course, you should do your own research on this. I am neither a doctor nor an accessibility expert, so don't listen to me. And I'm going to say the fade should happen for all users. So opacity 0 to 1, back to 0 and exit. But the motion of the Y position should only happen if the user does not have reduced motion. If they requested reduced motion, then it shouldn't happen. So this is how it would look for somebody who has enabled reduced motion. And when I disable it, then it snaps. And this is how it would look for them. So those are the things that I wanted to like flag that I haven't done in this application, but something that you should remember once you start diving into this. Finally, if you've already opened the link, which is this one, saturday.versal.app, at the absolute bottom, there is the repo. I have the repo link there. So you can click it. I have multiple branches for what it looks like with no motion, fade only, and the main branch is the final one. And it's a Next.js app. You can explore the code, tweak it, fork it, play around with it. It's all yours. And yeah, finally, I guess that's it. I